Maybe there is no greater experience of cognitive dissonance than when a person, especially someone who is central to our lives, dies. But really, any person. I mean, 1 minute there is this thriving human being with personality and thoughts and needs, someone who can crack jokes and roll their eyes and get fired up about something or other, and the next minute they're gone? It makes sense that we struggle to make sense of that goneness, and struggle to make sense also of that powerful feeling we have that something palpable and significant remains. It's that something that remains that most of the time we don't just want to remember. We want to stay connected to it. It is this beautiful human urge. And through time and across cultures, there are so many ways we human beings have tried to keep that connection, that palpable sense of remaining presence that endures beyond the absence. You can see it in the plethora of old photos in most of our homes or in house altars, in the sweater that never gets thrown away and still hangs by the door, in things we keep around like the lucky horseshoes my grandfather gave me from his winning horses. There were plenty of losing races, but the winning ones he would take the shoes from and give them to his grandchildren. Keep them pointing up, he'd say. If they're upside down, if you hang them, all the luck runs out. Well, the luck is long ago, I'm sure, gone, but the presence of these horseshoes in drawers and on surfaces in my house, it remains, connecting me to this person. Some of us naturally find ourselves telling stories of loved ones on a birthday or a death anniversary or a moment. Annual prayer masses are said. Books are dedicated and trees are planted. So many ways we remember and commemorate. Megan Lemur, you who lost your husband this last month, you reminded me this week of this familiar saying that I'd heard, and I tried to research it, and it ties back maybe to Aztec and Mayan teachings, this idea that people die not once, but 3 times. Once when our heart stops beating, once when we're buried in the grave, and once, finally, when no one says our name again. I know how much we all can feel and mourn each of those deaths, but particularly the sadness of the third. It comes sometimes, I think, to us when we sort through the loved one's things, especially photos, I think. One man told me, I don't know what to do with them all. After me, no one else will know or care who these people are. How awful it is to sense that life ends and then ends again in forgetfulness or forgottenness. And so we fight to keep one another alive, I think. For author and thinker Ta-Nehisi Coates, the keeping alive of family and friends, but also of leaders and heroes who have passed, the ancestor reverence, as he describes it, of his childhood is important, it seems, because of where and to what it grounds him, as is the case, I think, for most of us. The libation pouring he experienced in the African American community of his child in acts of resistance and witness, those gatherings fed by deep wells acknowledged that they were fed by deep wells of those who had led the way, honoring those who have sacrificed for what we have now, knowing not just the strength it gave us, but the commandment it has to carry the same forward. I, for one, love the phrase cloud of witnesses. It's mentioned in the Bible, and I actually have a hard time distinguishing between its metaphorical meaning and its literal sense. I mean, I've only been here in this community for 2 years and a little bit. And already it is hard for me to not think of those who are not here, but who were when I arrived. I can almost swear sometimes I can hear Maria Solis belting out in her operatic tones whatever anthem or hymn we're singing. Not blending, because she did not know how. Her voice was so gorgeous and unique, it wasn't meant to, I think. Vera Lee, I feel like I still see her by the back pew welcoming the choir members as they file forward to take their seats. I feel like I still see George Mayer staring out at me with his sweet and gentle smile that says, "It will be all right, Reverend. You're doing great." I cannot imagine what it must feel like for those of you who have been here 10 years or 50, who you must see and feel here on a regular basis. Before he left last year for his retirement destination of New Orleans, Fulton stood by the altar that we have in the gallery. He and Thomas looked over the photos of all the folks who have been lost to this community in the last few years. They stood there telling stories about each one. And it was with a sense of loss, but it's also with a sense, I think, of this life that reverberates between the walls and hangs in the air still, isn't it? I don't know if I ever told you this story, but years ago when I was serving in Washington, D.C., I was doing a wedding for a Buddhist monk, and he came to the sanctuary space one day before his betrothed came. He wanted to see it, and he walked the full aisle of the sanctuary quietly. He walked it, taking everything in. He turned and he walked slowly, taking everything in again. And then he came to me and he said, "There are very good spirits in this place." He wasn't talking about memories, right? He didn't know anybody. This was his first time in the sanctuary. He wasn't talking about that. He was talking about some living presence, some lingering essence of people that he sensed in that space. People he hadn't known, but somehow had left bits of themselves behind. And frankly, since I spent a lot of time in that building alone, I was really glad he said that what lingered were very good spirits. I wonder how many of us have had the same feeling of a literal presence of people we've lost. Many traditions, of course, religious and cultural, make a place for that, for the life that they believe endures. Not only in everyday rituals, but in special holy days. In Bali, when I was there years ago, every day in front of the house that I stayed in, an offering was laid at the steps to the spirits of that place. In India, homes will often have altars, sometimes with photos of the guru and the long lineage of teachers who have gone before. And there are stories in abundance of those teachers coming back to walk the earth as needed. And of course, we all right now are right in the middle of a season that's all about connection and tending to that connection. All Souls and All Saints' Day involved that sense of reaching out across the divide between the living and the dead, but as many of us know, the origins of that tie back in Europe to the ancient pagans with the observance of Samhain, and in this part of the world weave into pre-Christian Mayan, Aztec, and indigenous observance of Day of the Dead. For Celts, the observances and rituals around Samhain were built around the sense that this time of year, the veil was thinning. In the Middle Ages, there were traditions like the Dumb Supper, when a table would be set in your home and the ancestors were invited in to eat first, and then the living would eat. And after dinner, the communion of both together, and there would be the sharing of updates and news, and there would be games and laughter, and the windows and the doors would be left open all night for the dead to come and go, to join in as they arrived. Day of the Dead observances also often involve shared meals, of course, often at the grave. Sherry Moraga, the artist and activist with Mexican and indigenous heritage from her mother's side, she talks in her biography of her mother about visiting the grave. These weren't somber occasions, as Carmen points out. They also didn't have to just happen once a year. In her book, Native Country of the Heart, Moraga writes, "It was Mother's Day at the Resurrection Cemetery in Las Lomas de San Gabriel, and Las Familias had brought coolers and lounge chairs and umbrellas in anticipation of the high noon sun. Folks hung out, eating, praying, weeding the grass around the graves, washing them down with rags and buckets of water. We too, with my father and mom's remaining brother and sister, prayed and sang and told stories about my mom, and it felt good for all of us." Moraga grew up in a house with an altar to the loved and lost, tended to every day by her mother. And later, when her mother dies, she feels her mother's presence in the house so real that she cannot clear it out and put it up for sale until that feeling fades. Reporter Maria Hinojosa of NPR interviewed Moraga years ago about the book as it was about to come up. She asked the author, "These days, Sherry, when you communicate with your mom from the other side, what is she telling you?" I remember being surprised when I heard the question. But Moraga, who was raised in a world where the veil was thin and connection was more than to just ideas or memories, she didn't hesitate to answer. "I just had a dream," she said. "Just the other day I was waking up." She tells Hinojosa about how the book was about to come out and how it centered on her mother, and how she wanted to be able to tell the story of her mother and women like her, women who were strong and wise and beautiful, but also illiterate and couldn't write their own stories. But she was worried the book was loving but honest, and honest about some hard things. She didn't want it to be disrespectful. "Me pongo nerviosa," she said, until this moment with the dream. She said, "And I felt my mother at the side of my bed, and I felt her hand on top of mine. It was the strong, arthritic hand Moraga, the daughter, knew so well." And Moraga says, "And I felt utter approval from her, utter support, like, no te preocupes, mija, todo bien, don't worry, everything is good." That was a beautiful dream, Moraga said, I felt lucky to have it. We have so many reasons to want to communicate with and commune with, picnic with, and update with the news of our lives, all those we have loved and lost. Who wouldn't want to feel the hand on our hand again? Or have the keen sense of them in the room, or know they inhabit some place they loved where we can go and visit them, whether it's a graveside or a garden or a church sanctuary. Because nothing is more strange and more unbelievable, at least to me, maybe to some of you, than death. Nothing harder to make sense of than the sense that with people we loved who were so full of life and so part of us are gone, and that they are not gone. Not until we forget them, maybe, or forget how to connect across to the place where they reside. In this pluralistic community, I expect there are very different ideas about the limits of life and the possibilities of death. And I know we tenderly make room for it all among us because we must, because, well, no one really knows for sure what happens across the veil. And more important, maybe, we each need permission to find the ways that are right for us to make sense of loss. And also hold on to those that we love and keep them as close as we can. Because the truth is, not everything goes with them when they die. That we know in our bones. Hebrews 12:1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the dangers that so easily entangle, and run with perseverance the race that is marked for us." So may it be.